Okay, so we're around halfway through the real-time hours session of the US markets on Wednesday, the 28th of May. And we've got NVIDIA reporting earnings this evening after the closing bell. So I thought we'd take a look at what we might expect from those earnings and what we might expect the stock to do following them. Now, I want to start with the daily chart of the NASDAQ itself, the NDX. So NVIDIA, obviously a major component of both the NDX and the SPX, given that they are weighted indexes, and by market cap, NVIDIA, one of the top 3 largest companies in the US and indeed the world. So whatever happens to NVIDIA is likely to affect the NASDAQ in particular. And at the moment, in the more bullish interpretation of this move up off the early April low, we are still potentially in a wave 3 of an A wave with a little higher to go, then a pullback, then a fifth up, then a B, C to complete an ABC structure for a fifth in a very large diagonal. So NASDAQ on that basis higher to go. But there are some warnings here. The daily cycles are topping out here. And although they're not expecting the bulk of a decline to start until late June, I'm concerned here that this may not be the operative count and that we have to pay some attention to the alternative count that we're also following, whereby this entire move up is corrective against the drop we saw from the all-time high back in February into that early April low, and that we've still got another leg lower to go before we get the final move up in the larger degree fractal. Now, if we just zoom out to a weekly chart, doesn't really matter which version you use for the purposes of this, you can see that the weekly cycles have turned distinctively bearish here, although some of the signals are starting to suggest that we could still have another high before we start to get another move down at larger degree in the NASDAQ itself. Now, if we then turn our attention to the semiconductor, ETF, SMH. So NVIDIA, again, a major component of SMH. And again, you can see we've had a similar pullback to that which we've seen in indices, which one would have expected. Tech, and in particular semis, took the brunt of the selling earlier this year. And it's pushed back up, but it still hasn't taken out the all-time high. If it can do so, then this can run. And the next levels up, I've got a 314 and possibly as high as 446 in SMH. But again, there are concerns. The longer-term weekly cycles have already turned distinctly bearish. And on the daily cycle, although it's not expecting a decline just yet, again, end of June is when it's expecting that to get underway. The cycles are flattening out, so we've not got a particularly clear picture to the upside in SMH here. Now, if we come over and look at NVIDIA itself, so let's come over and find the stock chart of NVIDIA, and I'm just going to zoom back out also to its weekly chart. So if you just zoom in on this chart, you can see this almost parabolic move that we've been in NVIDIA that started back in 2014 and really started to take off in 2016. And that's very much the emerging of the AI space and their dominance in the hardware platforms within that space. If you go to the, let's just bring the main site down. So if you go to the Wave Cycle Trader Trading Hub and go into the stocks and ETFs thread, I've just done a write-up on NVIDIA. And also interestingly, IONQ, which is another stock that's in our watch list. And it just clearly identifies the absolute dominance that they have been the full stack within their given space. IONQ, similar by the way. Cathy Wood this week has added 4.7 million for the ARK fund ahead of today's earnings call. Now, whether that's positive or not, Cathy Wood has a mixed reputation and track record in terms of her timing. She's made some howlers in terms of timing of buying and selling some of the major stocks, and in particular Tesla. But that notwithstanding, she's added 4.7 million to the ARKK fund. There's also some interesting facts and figures there on IONQ as well. So I don't think this run is done by a long shot yet in NVIDIA. I do think that we've still got a little higher to go in what should be a cycle degree wave 3 off the all-time low here. So you've got a 1, 2, and all of this is still a wave 3 with an ideal target all the way up at 237. But that we're going to get a pullback then to somewhere between $30 and $49 before we get the fifth wave up, which again, an initial target for that would be 385, 842, and so on and so forth. So, but that's all for the future. If we come down to the cycles and look at it on the weekly cycles, again, you can see they are topping out here. So warnings from the weekly cycles on NVIDIA, it's suggesting that we are not far off, if not having started, a bigger move down. And if you look at this here, this is awkward stuff here. I marked this 4 as in, and even if it's not, and it comes a little deeper, that's not what I'm expecting at that degree for this move. That would be the beginning of this much larger degree wave 4. So ideally, we still get another push up before we start to roll over here in NVIDIA. And indeed, the signals that we use, so the trender, the CRSI, and indeed the Mansfield on the weekly chart are pushing up, but we've only got a consensus of 1 to the upside, so effectively fairly neutral. And the Brexit indicator is negative here on a weekly time frame. Now, if I bring it down to a daily time frame, things look a little bit more encouraging. So cycles on the daily time frame have turned, and we're in the fairly early stages of the next leg up. And in fact, if you look here at the phasing, we've got a phasing score on the main cycle of -95. So bear in mind, they go from -100, which is the pinpoint area of a trough. 0 is neutral, plus 100 is the top of a cycle. So in the early stages of a daily cycle to the upside in NVIDIA, which is encouraging and supportive of the count that we have here. The Elliott wave count, if that's a wave 4 and we've got a 1, 2, we've come above the 1.0 extension based on the length of this one projected up off the wave 2. So that's also, a fairly big tick in the box for the bullish case here. What we need to see is this go 3, 4, 5. Now the minimum target there would be 180, but much more likely up into these fib extensions here between 204 and 231. And that lines up nicely then with the targets that we have for this wave 3 from the weekly chart and the fibs of the larger degree fractal from an Elliott wave perspective. So a lot to potentially be positive about going into earnings. Support levels going into earnings. The first one is this, the 1.0 extension here, bottom up at 131. That's the most immediate support level in NVIDIA. The next would be at 129. Now, if we just add to this fib structure here, the 764 and the 618 bottom up fibs. So the next two levels, 121 and then 116. 116 would be the absolute extreme. Take out 116 and either this 4's not in, or this was an A, B, C for a larger wave 1 in a diagonal structure, and we would see a retrace against this as a wave 2 before we then go 3, 4, 5. Now, given the time that we're expecting this structure to take up to the another new all-time high, and the structure of the moves in the NASDAQ and other indices and stocks that we follow, that wouldn't surprise me. So on that basis, we could see a bigger pullback in the in NVIDIA tonight. But providing it holds the 83.27 low that we saw, so if we just come down to a smaller time frame and take these off, So if we go back to the wave 4 low, that's all the way back over here. Let me just tidy this up so that it all lines up. Yeah, the low was 83.73. Providing we hold that, and specifically a retrace fib against the structure up off that low. So they'll give you those fibs on the 2-hour chart. That would, there we go. So we'd be looking for this to hold around 107 to 101, worst case down at 94, if we get a larger pullback on earnings, and specifically to hold 83.66 and then chop higher. And as I say, that really wouldn't surprise me given the length of time for the cycle to the upside that we're expecting it to take, and the fact that we're expecting exactly that structure in the main US indices, and specifically the NASDAQ ongoing, on the basis that the early April low in those indices was all of the larger degree correction. Now, the other thing that is a little concerning with with NVIDIA here, if you look at the block trades that came in, I'll post the chart for you in the chat thread. There was a huge set of block trades came in at the highs in MAGS, which is the Mag 7 ETF, towards the close of yesterday's market. Now, we don't know with those whether they are effectively the larger players adding to positions, or whether they are people selling into strength. What we do know is with this run up, it's largely been retail that has driven this run up off the early April low. There's a lot of funds that haven't participated in this. So whether that's some of the funds playing catch up or FOMO remains to be seen. Now, the final thing I want to look at is the relative rotation. So if we look at the core sector ETFs against the SPY and start with the weekly, and we're looking for XLK here. Now, XLK, which really got hammered coming down, is actually starting to look rather good on the weekly. It's moved up into the improving quadrant and it's heading up. It's not heading across yet into leading, but that's a considerable improvement on the weekly time frame compared to where we were just a few weeks ago. If I bring it down to the daily time frame and we look at the same thing, XLK, it's taken a bit of a battering in this last week or so. I say battering, this is relative to the rest of the sectors in the SPX and to the SPX itself. So it's come out of leading and is weakening here in XLK. So that's slightly concerning. Now, if we then go and look at the Magnificent Seven versus the SPY itself. So I'm specifically looking for each of the individual stocks, relative performance relative to the SPY. And you can see that NVIDIA, in actual fact, is in the leading sector, or leading quadrant rather, but it's drifting, it's not heading this way, but it's drifting lower. So that's a little bit of a concern here. The one that's been on a tear is Tesla, but you can see the ones that are starting to fade here: Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, and then to a lesser extent NVIDIA and Tesla, whereas the ones that are now starting to improve, or the one that's really starting to improve here, is Google. Apple is looking pretty sorry for itself here, but it took a battering last week courtesy of Mr. Trump and his tariff statements. So mixed view going into this, but broadly positive in NVIDIA. I would suggest if it holds those upper support levels that I've given you earlier on in this analysis, then we can continue to see an impulse structure play out to new all-time highs on an immediate basis. But I would, just as a warning, suggest that it may see a deeper pullback and the structure up off the early April low there for an ABC, and on a bullish basis that would be a wave 1 in a diagonal structure, and we should see a swift but deep pullback against it and I've given you the levels for that as well on the lower time frame chart. Those charts obviously are shared analysis across both the Trading Vision and Wave Cycle Trader platforms for those of you that want to go and take a look at them. Okay, let's see what we do get after earnings, and I'll do an update on this tomorrow so that we can have a look and see what actually happened.